Today is Saturday, November 18, 2023, and we're at the Beat Studio at Brunswick High School. And today's program is actually one of a series that the Brunswick Area Historical Society is planning on doing in an effort to connect the Brunswick of the past to Brunswick of the present. And one way to do that is to interview people that were part of Brunswick's past, and that's what we're going to do today. If you grew up in Brunswick in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the name of the family that we're going to be talking about today will probably sound familiar to you. And especially if you were a student at Brunswick High School in the early 50s, or a student at Brunswick High School in the late 50s to mid 60s, you're certainly going to remember the gentleman that I'm with today, and that is Mr. Don Shackleton. Don grew up in Brunswick. He was a product of the Brunswick Schools. His family was pretty prominent and active in the Brunswick community back in those decades. After John graduated from Brunswick High School and went off to college, he came back to Brunswick High School, his alma mater, and was a teacher here, was a track coach here. And if you were a football player during that period of time, you certainly remember Coach Shackleton. He was our head football coach at that time. My name is Jim Hayes. I'm also a graduate of Brunswick High School. I remember Coach Shackleton because he was my football coach when I was a sophomore here in Brunswick. He and I kind of took a similar path. We both grew up here and graduated from Brunswick, went off to college, and we both came back here to start our teaching careers. I've been fortunate enough to have 34 plus years of my educational career here in Brunswick Schools as a teacher, a coach, and some administrative positions. So with all that being said, I'd like to introduce to you Mr. Don Shackleton.
Thanks, Jim.
You're welcome. Don, I'm going to be asking a few questions, but I want you to know up front, this is very informal, and it's really an opportunity for you to share some of your memories of growing up in Brunswick. I've heard from a couple of other graduates that they spent some time with you a little while ago, and you're a terrific storyteller about some of the things that went on in Brunswick. So hopefully you'll share some of those stories with us today. Let me get started, though, by asking you a few specific questions. Where and when were you born?
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, somewhere on a street called Fleetus Avenue. I was born at home. My dad and my grandmother delivered me. And when the doctor got there, he said, "Put him in the sink. I think you broke his neck." I was a breech birth.
Really?
And it was Dr. Sobel. He's a doctor on my birth certificate. Well, they didn't break my neck. But I think my son Jeff has tried to do some homework on all of this. And I no longer think there is a Fleetus Avenue. There's a Fleet Avenue. But I think this is spelled P-H.
Okay.
L-I-T-U-S or something like that. I think it's probably part of an interstate now. But that's where I was born. And then we moved to West 47th Street. And I don't know if we rented a house in West 47th Street or what have you. But in 1939, my brother and I, he was 6 years old, I was 3 years old. And he was 9 years old. He was 6 years older than I am. We moved to Brunswick with my dad. My mother and my grandmother stayed in Cleveland. They ran the cafeteria at John Hay High School. So they had a job. And I remember December 7th, 1941. I think I was 5 years old. My brother and I were in the front lawn. We had a big elm tree out front. And my dad came running out and he said, "You guys get in here." And he had the radio on, and that's when they announced Pearl Harbor. And my dad was lucky enough that when he went to East Tech High School, and when he was a junior in high school, his father left the family. And he left the family. My dad had 2 brothers and a sister. He was the oldest one, so he quit high school to go to work to help raise the family. So he was a tool die maker. And since he was a tool die maker, he got a job in Medina at a perm mold company, making tools and dies or whatever tool and die makers do. And he worked 7 days a week, 12 hours a day during the war. But during that time, he was building our house. He bought 2 building lots in Brunswick on Keller Drive for $18.35 a piece. And then he had the trees cut down and the stumps pulled out on one building lot. That's where he built our house.
How and why did your dad make the decision to move out to the country? Because that's what we were considered back then, country. I mean, what
Probably because you could buy a building lot for $18.35.
Okay,
I imagine.
okay,
And I think he just wanted to get out of Cleveland,
okay.
and he was able to. Why other than that, I don't know.
So after the lots were bought, you said your dad himself built the house?
He built the house by himself, yes. And he built the house, and somewhere between probably around 1940 or so, he and my brother Skip lived in the house. We didn't have a floor in the house. We had 4 walls and a roof. And I remember we each had a day bed. Day beds were like little cots made out of steel. And he would throw the wood in that pot-belly stove and get it white hot. And you'd lay on your day bed, and it was a very cold winter, as I recall. You'd roll over and put your belly towards the stove, and your belly get hot. Your butt would get cold. You'd roll over again, and the opposite would be true. You did that all winter long. And after he built the house, he had a guy named Happy Ward. Happy Ward had a team of horses. They lifted the house up. They jacked the house way up in the air. And they got it way up in the air. And then Happy Ward came with his team of horses and a slip scoop and dug out the basement. And my dad put in the basement floor, the basement walls. And then we set the house back down on those walls. He poured the floor, the basement floor, with the concrete. And all these supplies came from BH&L Elevator down
On 303?
on 303. And then when we wanted to have a driveway after the house was set down, he put in a furnace in the basement. He put in a sump pump, and he did this all by hand. And then we put a garage on the side, and we had an outhouse, a very fancy outhouse, 2 holes. It was beautiful. And finally, when I got to be, I don't know, 10 or 12 years old, he made the comment that we're now going to have a bathroom, an indoor bathroom. So my brother Skip and I started digging, and we dug down. The bathroom was like 10 by 15. And we dug down about 10 feet deep. Then he poured the footers, laid the block, and built the bathroom. And all the dirt we dug out of there, we started spreading all the way around the house, which is still up in the air.
Now, is this the house where you grew, while you were a kid, that you grew up through the teenage years and everything in high school? Did your parents stay in the same house?
Yes.
Or did you move in Brunswick at all once you
No,
got
no,
here?
no.
You stayed there?
No, we stayed. We just drove by the house coming here.
Oh, it's still there?
And
Does it look the same?
No, he's added on to it a little
Oh,
bit. Yeah. We had a flat roof garage, and the garage had a wall around it up above so you didn't fall off. And when I was young, I would start place kicking, and I'd set the ball out in the driveway and see if I could kick it up. If I had put it on the roof like I normally did, then I had to go get a ladder and climb up there and get the ball and throw it back down. But that's how I learned practice place kicking. And when we lived there, there was no road. It was physically a cow path.
well, as you're talking, I grew up on Hadcock Road.
That was the end of our road.
Yeah, right. And
Keller runs in we just came down Hadcock
and
Road.
I know how bad Hadcock was because it was nothing. It wasn't even a road. It was just a large path,
Yeah,
a dirt path that they threw some gravel on.
that was
So
Keller
our house
Drive,
was
too.
always full of dust, and then every once in a while the city would come through and pour oil to keep the dust down, and then you had oil all over your cars. So I'm
Yeah.
guessing if you guys came off of Keller-Hanna down to Hadcock, you had the same thing.
Right.
And Hadcock was, or Keller-Hanna was probably worse than Hadcock at the time.
Well, it went through the woods.
Yeah.
And when it rained real hard or snowed, and when you couldn't drive down to our house, we parked our car at Route 42
On 42.
and walked down to the house. And it was, well, that's what it was.
And did your mom then eventually moved out from Cleveland
Yes.
after you didn't settle
Yes.
in for a while?
Yeah, my mom and my grandmother moved out. Matter of fact, we built our house down near Hadcock. My Uncle Al built a house just up the road from us on the same side of the road. That house is still there. And then after the war, or shortly after, then my dad and his brothers built my grandmother a house. It's still there. It's right underneath the water tower
Okay.
on that side of Keller. It's coming down the hill. So my grandmother's house is still there, my Uncle Al's house is still there, and our house is still there.
But do they look the same when you came down there today?
No, no. My Uncle Al had a big house, and he had an upstairs bathroom, which was very fancy. And he always had a big garden, and he had a very big chicken coop. During the war, we'd go in our back between Keller Drive and Minor Drive. We owned that property going all the way back through there. Then my dad sold off the one lot on Minor Drive that was right behind us. But before he did that, during the war, we raised 2 pigs. We had a pig pen back there. And my Uncle Al lived up the road, and he had a big chicken coop. And my grandmother every year raised chickens and ducks and 1 pig.
Well, you won't find much livestock being raised in Brunswick anymore.
I don't think it'd go too well, would it? But in January, every year we would have like a butchering weekend. And it was my job to go in the coop and shoo out the pig that they wanted. We had 2 pigs. Why it made a difference, I don't know. I think they just wanted me to get in and wallow around in the mess. And I would chase the pig out, and my dad would be standing on top of the coop, and he'd hit it in the head with a sledgehammer. Then my grandfather would get on there, and he'd stick it. All right. And that was not nice. We had a big cast iron pot, and they had fire going and water in the pot, and a hoist up above. We hoist the pig up and down, put them into boiling water, and then scrape them all down, and then cut it up in quarters, and take it to Medina to Tibbetts. Tibbetts had an ice and coal company right downtown Medina. And we would take the meat in there, and they would cut it up, put it into pork chops or bacon. And every Saturday we'd go into Medina and get all the kind of meat we wanted.
What were your parents' names? Because the reason I'm asking, because when I was looking at some things, getting ready for today, the name Shackleton appeared a lot in some of the newspapers in Medina County for various reasons, and it seemed like there were several different Shackletons that lived in Medina County. So, of those Shackletons, which two were your actual parents?
My dad was Harry Shackleton.
Okay.
He had a brother, Fred Shackleton. He had another brother, Richard Shackleton. Fred and Richard lived on Forest Drive, over off of what's now 130th.
Okay.
I think we called it Town Line Road.
Okay, yes.
And Uncle Richard was in the Navy during World War II. Uncle Freddie worked in a factory during World War II. And Freddie had 3 daughters, Jean, June, and Joan. Uncle Richard had 2 sons, Jack and Evie. And they lived further down Forest Drive on the right hand. Yeah, there was my dad and his 2 brothers. And then his mother lived up the road. And she had remarried. When her husband left her with all the kids, she remarried to a guy named Woodmansey, Earl Woodmansey. And he lived with her up on the hill.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, how is it that the name Shackleton was so common? As I read through some of these things, were they it seemed like they were involved in a lot of things.
Oh, they were. Everybody in Brunswick at that time was part of the volunteer fire department. And when I was in junior high school, my mother ran the village tavern.
Where was the village tavern?
It was right down the street from the high school. Matter of fact, if you go back in those days, when they built the middle school, it took quite a while. Building the middle school, I don't know what school it is now, but it was right next to the high school.
Well, that was what was eventually called the Byzantiner Center. Both those buildings are gone now. There's one big building there now.
When you were in school, it was the junior high school.
Yes.
Remember that?
Yes.
And that's where my wife Bonnie taught.
Right. I had Bonnie for study hall.
Yeah.
Actually, it's kind of ironic that you brought that up. I was actually in Bonnie's study hall on November 22nd, 1963, when the announcement came on the PA system that President Kennedy had been shot. I was in your wife's study hall at that very moment. Yeah.
I was in my office in the gym, and I didn't know about it till Joe Bilski ran in and told me.
Yeah.
Remember Joe Bilski?
Sure. Uh-huh.
He said, "Coach, did you hear?" I says, "No." So then we turned the radio on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a sad time.
Yeah.
So you were on Keller-Hanna, and you said you were 3 when you moved there.
Yeah.
And you stayed there until you actually graduated from high school. So your whole boyhood was there on Keller-Hanna, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about what you did for fun back in the early 40s and mid 40s. And what did you guys do for fun? Or didn't you have time for fun?
Well, once I went to school, school was fun.
School was fun?
I enjoyed every year I went to school.
Now, where did you go to elementary and middle and junior high school before you
same building?
Same. Oh, everything was in the one building.
Yep.
Okay.
The first and second grades were on the first floor, along with the boiler room and the cafeteria.
Okay.
That was on the first floor. That was the first and second grade. The third and fourth grade, I think, were on the second floor. I forget the name of my first grade teacher, but I really liked her. My second grade teacher also, I really liked all my teachers. And they always told you if you were bad, you had to go to the boiler room. Well, the cafeteria was right there too.
Right.
And my grandmother and my mother worked in the cafeteria.
Oh, they did?
Yeah. And then we went upstairs, and in the 4th grade, I had a real nice teacher named Mrs. Parsegian. And her brother-in-law was Ara Parsegian, who was the football coach at Notre Dame.
Oh.
Yeah. She was a very, very nice, she was my 4th grade teacher.
So other than other than school, like when school was out for the day, did you guys have outdoor? Did you play outdoors?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Because there weren't any organized activities
No,
for kids back then.
No, we called it our ball diamond. It was up on Minor Drive, right near the creek. It was on Minor Drive. And we'd go up there and we'd play football, we'd play mostly softball. And then we'd play football, just with other kids in the neighborhood. And that's what we did.
And then how about later on?
But then we go I do a lot of fishing. I used to walk down Headcock Road to 303 and down 303 to Plum Creek,
Okay.
which ran into Brunswick Lake.
Mm-hmm.
I had a cane pole and I go dig some worms and I go down there and I fish for bluegill and once in a while a catfish or a bullhead. Then I go home.
How about when you were older, when you were a teenager?
I stopped going fishing.
Stopped going fishing?
Basically.
And what did you do? What did you do in its place?
I was out for all 3 sports: football, basketball, and baseball. When I was in high school. 2 other guys and I started a little trio. The boys and I were just talking about it. Larry Aubin, who lived on Minor Drive, he played the accordion. And I played a guitar. I bought a guitar and I learned about 5 chords on a guitar. And our other buddy, Wayne Robeson, and I sang. And anytime they had any kind of assembly, we were the entertainment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah. And Lou Visentainer was our coach.
Oh, okay.
He got us the songs, and he was our coach.
Another
And one time we went.
well-known gentleman, Lou Visentainer.
He was a great, great guy.
Yeah, he was.
He was my teacher. He was also one of my principals under Maud Edwards. They were 2 great administrators.
Yes, they were.
2 great administrators. And I don't know if you can remember Maud Edwards, but when she walked down the hallway, everybody paid attention. If you were in a classroom, you heard that.
Yes.
Coming down the hallway.
I can remember Maud Edwards very well. And I tell people my favorite story about Maud Edwards, who was our principal still after you left, when I was there. She came on the PA system one day and said, students and staff, we're going to have a fire drill, and we're going to be timing how long it takes for everyone to get out of the building. And at the time, I was on crutches. My whole leg was in total leg cast because I had broken my leg in a football game. And so I got to the top of the stairs on the 3rd floor, and I'm standing there with my crutches, and Miss Edwards came by, and I said, Miss Edwards, this is a drill, and it's not really a fire. And do I really have to go down all these steps with these crutches? And she looked at me, and with that mean look, and she said, when we have a fire drill, everybody goes. Now get down those steps. And she actually scared me, and I fell. And I tumbled down 2 flights of stairs. My crutches were flying, and my leg of the cast was sticking out. And I landed down a flight below, and she came down, and she never said, are you okay? she never said
Oh,
it.
no,
She
no.
walked right by me.
No,
But she was. That's how she was. She was a tough lady.
she was beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was the greatest administrator I've ever known.
Yeah.
And Lou Vizentainer complimented her very, very well.
Yes. Yeah. They were a great duo. Well, we talked a little bit about the home that your dad built, and you talked a little bit about your relatives that were here. Now, these are names that we came across when we were doing a little research. So when I read these names, if you could just quickly tell me how they were related, like Skip Shackleton.
My brother.
Your brother. Your older brother.
Yeah.
Fred Shackleton.
My uncle.
Okay. Harry Shackleton, your dad.
Fred was also my grandfather's name. His name was Fred also, the grandfather that left the family.
Oh, okay.
But my dad's next older brother was Fred Shackleton. He lived on Forest Drive. Then he had a younger brother yet, Richard Shackleton.
Right. Yes, his name came up a lot.
He also lived on Forest Drive.
And Harry was your dad, right?
Yes.
And Betty Shackleton.
My mom.
Your mom. Mary Ann Shackleton.
She married my Uncle Freddie.
Okay.
My Uncle Freddie's first wife died, Aunt Bernice. They're both buried in the old cemetery.
On the corner of Pearl and 303?
Yeah. Yeah, behind the old bank at the old cemetery in Brunswick. My Aunt Bernice died, she was only 32 when she died. She died of ovarian cancer.
Oh.
And Uncle Freddie died when he was 69. He died out in Phoenix, Arizona. And when she passed, he married Marion Steen, who lived on Minor Drive. She got a divorce from her husband, and Uncle Freddie married her.
And apparently there was, did the Shackleton family have regular reunions? There was something in one of the articles.
They usually wound up in a big argument. So, no, we didn't have regular ones.
Oh, because
but every time we had one, it wound up in a big argument.
There was an article in the Gazette that said Mr. and Mrs. Skip Shackleton and John recently attended the annual Shackleton reunion at the home of Mr. and Mrs. Harry Shackleton. That would be your parents.
Yeah.
On Keller-Hanna. And I got the impression from this article that there were reunions on a regular basis, but that's not true.
No.
No, okay. Because everybody got in arguments.
Yeah, especially with my Aunt Anna. Yeah.
Tell me about what Brunswick looked like back then. Let's talk a little bit about, because you came back into Brunswick today, you see everything, and you're probably like me when I think back to what it was in '57. I can imagine what you think when it was like back in the '30s. Tell me a little bit about what it looked like in the '30s.
If you came down Hadcock Road to Route 303, all right. Route 303 at that time was half red brick and half gravel.
Oh, really?
Yes. The north side was red brick. The south side had been gravel that was rolled over by a roller.
Huh. Right. And it was, if I remember, when I was a kid in third grade, it was tree lined.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there were trees on lines on both sides of the street. It was beautiful.
Yeah. But prior to that, it was just the cars stayed on the Red Brook ride. If you were riding your bike, or at the end of Hadcock Road, was Charlie Gibbs' farm.
Right.
Charlie Gibbs was there was a Gibbs Motor Company in Medina. He bought one of their first cars. He had it in the barn. He cranked it to start it. The car started and it ran right into him and pinned his legs up against the back of the barn.
Ooh.
He finally got out of there, sold the car, bought a pony, and had this beautiful yellow four-wheeled cart with a roof on it. The roof was yellow canvas, and it had all these frilly things hanging around. The horse's name was Bomber. And he and Bomber would go up the gravel side.
Oh,
All right. And you could always hear Charlie coming. Charlie went to the Church of Christ, the white church that isn't there anymore. The brick church, the Methodist church, is still there.
right.
All right. And Charlie and Bomber would go to church. Charlie would go uptown and he'd go to Zimmerman's store and do whatever he had to do. But he was quite a character. And if you went to the Church of Christ, the white church that's no longer there, everybody singing the hymn. Charlie would whistle a hymn. He could whistle real loud. You could hear him all over everybody singing. You could hear Charlie whistling. Yeah. That was part of my thing about 303, was Charlie Gibbs.
And what about 42, Pearl Road? That must look a lot different too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we didn't have any. There was nothing there.
No, there wasn't even a, the
Well,
Center Plaza wasn't even
that
there.
was the main, that was the 3C highway. Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati.
Yeah.
And when we couldn't get down Keller Road because of the weather or the mud or what have you, that's where we parked our car. I just showed Greg when we were coming out here where we parked our car. There's still a little parking lot. And that's where we parked, and then we would walk down to our house. You know. And going along a lot further, in 1946, my brother and I would walk up to Pearl Road, and we'd get on a bus, and we take the bus to downtown Cleveland.
Cleveland.
And then we walk down to the old stadium, and for 35 cents, we could go in and watch the Browns play.
35 cents?
Yeah.
You can't even buy a bottle of water for 35 cents
No.
anymore.
But and you know, it was an enormous stadium,
You're right, yeah.
and we could sit almost anywhere we wanted to. And after the game, we'd walk back to the bus depot and take the bus back to Brunswick.
Did you guys go down to Cleveland a lot?
Not a lot, but we went.
A couple games?
We went to quite a few games too. Yeah. Yeah.
That would have been in what, the
In
early
it.
50s?
No, that was in 46, 47,
Oh.
48.
Oh.
That's when the Browns were that's when they were the Browns. You know,
So
you never
those are
heard
the
of
days-
Otto Graham
Otto
having
Graham,
a bad
sure.
shoulder
Yeah.
or Jim Brown having a bad shoulder or something.
Are you talking about Deshaun Watson now? Is that what you're talking about?
Whoever it's, how many, he had 30-some quarterbacks. Otto Graham was there forever.
Yes, he was. And he won a lot of championships, if I recall.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
How about your the neighborhood there, the Keller-Hanna Minor Drive area? Who are your childhood friends from that neighborhood?
Right across the street from us lived the Winterfields. They had two boys and a girl. The boys were Lou and Roy, and I think the girl's name was Marion. Roy and I played a lot together. Lou Winterfeld was the same age as my brother. I think Roy might have been a year older than I was. But when my brother was 15 years old, he and Lou hitchhiked to California.
Really?
Yeah. And,
Did that upset your parents?
oh yeah, yeah.
Did they know he was going, or did he just take off?
We had no idea where he was.
He was 15.
He was 15, and so was Lou. They were both 15.
Did they hitchhike out to California?
Yes, yes. And we didn't know anything about him until one day Alvin Wolf, who lived up on Minor Drive,
Right.
he had a phone. We didn't have a phone. And he came to the house, and he said he got a phone call from the Los Angeles Police Department that they had two boys out there that they picked up as vagrants or whatever. And it would cost $200 to get them home, to get each one of them home. So my dad had Alvin Wolf wire or whatever you do for $200. And they got on a train, and that's what it cost to get them back. And the night they were supposed to come in at the terminal tower, my mom and dad and I went down to the terminal tower at the train station. He was supposed to be in like 10 o'clock or something like that. We waited and waited. He never showed up.
Where'd he
And
go?
about 2 in the morning, we went home, and he was laying in bed. He got off the train early and hitchhiked home.
Oh.
He got all hugs and kisses and honey and all this and all that. A few months later, I went to Nickel Day at Chippewa Lake, their opening day. I was supposed to be home by 10 o'clock. I didn't get home till 11. I got the hell beat out of me. And I said, trouble is, I said, he's gone for a month. He gets hugs and kisses. I'm 2 hours late. And I got a whack on the back. You know, I didn't stay away long enough. Chippewa Lake was beautiful in those days.
Yes, it was. What about, you talked a little bit about what you kids did. What about the adults in Brunswick back then? I mean, were there social activities that you remember your parents going to, like dinner parties, or what did the adults in Brunswick do for entertainment? Or not much, because they were too busy working.
Yeah, my mom worked. My mom always worked. And when I was in junior high school, she ran the village tavern, which part of it, that half of it was a tavern, a restaurant, and a beer joint. And the other part was a Ohio station. And Tom Hogue owned the whole building. So my mother rented her part from Tom Hogue.
I'm trying to remember where that was, because I don't remember I remember a Shell station across from the school.
No, this was a Ohio station, Jim.
Was it down more toward Keller-Hanna?
No, it was right next to City Hall.
Oh, okay.
Right next to it.
Oh, okay.
In the back of City Hall was the fire department.
Okay, now I can picture.
And whenever a fire came in, the call came into the village tavern phone.
Oh.
And Mom blew the siren.
Okay.
All right. And the fire truck was right there. So she was in charge of you know.
Wow, how things change, huh?
Setting the siren off when there was a fire.
So if there was a fire, the call went into the village tavern.
Yeah.
And your mom at the village tavern notified the fire department.
Well, they got notified by the siren.
Well, I shouldn't laugh, but they probably did the best they could back then.
Yeah.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if those buildings are still there or not. I doubt it.
Well, I know the city hall's not there. I know that. Unfortunately, that's a whole nother story. There was an article about Mrs. Harry Brilhart of Pennsylvania visiting her daughters, Mrs. Al Plaster and Mrs. Harry Shackleton. So, that's your mom, and was Mrs. Al Plaster your mom's sister?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, my Aunt Jeanette.
And Al Plaster was obviously your uncle then.
Yes, they lived right up the street from us.
And I noticed his name was quite frequent too, like when there was articles or discussions about the fire department. So he must have been on the volunteer fire department.
They were all on the fire department.
They were all on the fire department.
Yeah.
And everything was volunteer back then, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Uncle Al and my Uncle Freddie wasn't on the fire department because he lived down at Forest Drive. But he, you know, everybody in town was on the fire department. I don't know, so I think they had a chief, fire chief, I suppose. I don't know who it was. But anybody that lived in Brunswick was on the fire department, any man. Yeah. And Al Plaster was my Aunt Jeanette's, my mom's brother-in-law.
And you mentioned Joe Bilski before. The Bilskis lived, did they live on Minor?
Yes.
So they were kind of in your neighborhood,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, they lived further west I'm minor.
But those boys weren't. They were younger than you, weren't they?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about. You mentioned World War II, and we came across an article. Actually, John Castley came across an article that talked about your parents and being involved in collecting scrap metal for the war effort and raising money for the USO. How did your parents get involved and become active in that with war bonds?
Everybody did that.
Everybody. It was in Brunswick. There were a lot of patriots in Brunswick.
You know who was really good at that was Bill Jacobs, my coach.
Yes, I remember. He was the coach before you.
He was my coach, yeah. And you would just get a group of people together. Remember, we had a lot of farms in those days. And sometimes if they had this kind of scrap metal, that kind of scrap metal, whatever, we'd pick it up and take it. I forget where we took it, but we took all of it there. And then it would be picked up, and you take them wherever it had to go, probably into Cleveland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, scrap drives were very big, and anybody that had anything, yeah.
Along the same lines, I wanted to ask you, while you were in junior high school, while you were a junior and senior in high school at Brunswick High School, that would have been like 53 and 54, is that right? 1953, 1954?
No, I graduated in 53.
You graduated in 53, so it would have been like 52 and 53. That's right when the Korean War was starting up.
My brother was in the Navy at that time during Korea.
Okay. And then later, when you were a teacher and a coach at Brunswick High School, America was involved well, the Korean War was kind of over by then, but the Vietnam War, of course, was cranking up. There was the Cold War, and getting back to the Korean War. Were you as a kid, and were the other kids anxious about the war, the wars? I mean, was that something that the kids?
Oh yeah.
Nowadays, the young people, I think, are pretty. I think they're pretty actively interested in the wars that are going on. But I wonder back then if it was a kid thing that did the kids worry about the war?
Oh,
what was going to happen to us?
Certainly. It seemed like, we went from World War II. It seemed like 6 months after World War II ended, we went to Korea. We had one guy that lived on Minor Drive. His last name was Williams. I can't think of his first name now. But he went in the military, I think in the Army. And it seemed like 2 months later he was dead during World War II. But it just seemed when I was a kid, it just seemed that wars are normal. We went from World War I, which I don't remember, of course, right into World War II, which I do remember, and then into Korea.
Yeah.
My brother went in the Navy during Korea. He was stationed at Subic Bay in the Philippines in the Navy. But it just seemed that we went from there to there to there, and then to Korea. The only thing that kept me out of Vietnam, I was fortunate enough to have a biological science minor. And that beautiful lady, Maud Edwards, came down to my office in the gym one Friday afternoon. And she said, Don, starting Monday, you're going to teach one class of 9th grade general science. And all I had at that time was health and physical education for every boy from the 8th grade to seniors. And I said, why? And she showed me a letter from the draft board. And Russia had that thing called a Sputnik
Right.
going around. Thanks to that Sputnik, and thanks to my minor in biological science, I was exempt. Science teachers and math teachers were exempt.
Oh, but not phys ed teachers.
No. So I became a 9th grade general science teacher.
Well, she was looking out for you.
I called her a sweetheart, didn't I?
Yeah, you did.
Huh? She was my sweetheart, I'll tell you that.
See, she scared me down the steps, but she was your sweetheart.
Yeah, she got me out of Vietnam, just like that.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit for a few minutes about your ancestry. Where did your folks come from? I mean, what's your nationality, and where did they, when they came to America, and where did they come from?
My grandmother that you just read about, Isabel Brillhart, came right from Glasgow, Scotland. She was carrying my mom on the way over on the boat. My mom was born in Barnesboro, Pennsylvania, which is a suburb of Spangler, Pennsylvania.
Spangler.
The only thing that divides them is a railroad.
Oh.
A railroad. This is Spangler and that's Barnesboro.
Okay.
My mother was born in Barnesboro. Right. And my mother's father, whose name was Brown, was killed in a coal mine accident after they got here. He was 32 years old.
Oh.
All right. My mother and her sister and brother were all raised in Barnesboro. My grandmother said she would never remarry until all her children were married. Well, my Uncle Pete wound up in Toledo. He was a bus driver in Toledo. My Auntie Jean and my mom and Grandma moved to the east side of Cleveland so they could find work. Then my grandmother met a guy named Harry Brillhart.
I saw that name there too
Yeah.
sometimes.
And he lived in Akron. He was working in Akron, but he had a farm in Pennsylvania. And the farm was 300 or 400 acres. And it was so hilly that he couldn't put a tractor on it. He always had a team of horses and a team of mules. And he always worked a horse and a mule together. They got along better that way.
Mm.
And he spent his whole life cutting down trees, pulling out stumps to have more land to farm. And he had this beautiful 3-story house with a nice front porch on it, and a milk house over here, all made out of stone, and a big, beautiful barn, a wooden barn. And when I was a kid, we would go there. Matter of fact, my brother went there one summer and worked for him all summer. And Grandpa Brillhart had a hired hand named Horace, who lived right with them. And he milked 50 cows every day by hand. He and Horace. And he farmed all that land, pulled all those trees out. And in the back on the hillside, he had a little coal mine. The coal came right out of the side of the hill, and that's how he heated the house. Mm. And they never had an electric stove or a gas stove. They had a wood burning stove that Grandma burned coal in, and that's what she cooked on. And they had a little room off the side of the house where they kept the wood and the coal to keep it dry. And that's what they did.
Have you ever had the opportunity to go back over to Scotland, where your parents?
No, I've been to Scotland, but I never went to Glasgow. Okay. I went to Edinburgh. I did go to St. Andrews, but I've never been to Glasgow. I've been to London and all over that area. Bonnie taught English her whole life. When
Yeah.
when I was teaching at Brunswick, she was teaching at your school,
Right.
the middle school.
Yeah.
Then when I left Brunswick, she got a job at North Olmsted High School,
Oh, is that where she went?
graduated from.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, she taught for 36 years.
What? Let's talk a little bit about. Well, first of all, I know when you graduated, you went off to Baldwin Wallace College, and that's, again, we're kind of similar in that, because when I graduated, I went off to Baldwin Wallace College. But I'm interested in, why Baldwin Wallace? Because it was close, or was there something about Baldwin Wallace in particular that caught your eye?
No, first, spring of my senior year, Jim, Kent State head coach was named Trevor Reese. Very nice man. And Bill Jacobs called me up to his office one day, and I went up to his office in the old gym where everything happened. And there were two assistant coaches there from Kent State, Rick Forzano and Frank Lauterbur. They were Kent State assistant coaches. And a student. They took me to Kent State for their spring football game. The student was Lou Holtz.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
And I went over to Kent. I walked in the locker room and I saw these guys. I was 5'10", weighed 170 pounds. And I looked at these guys and I thought, I don't think I belong here. So I went back and I told Coach Jacobs, I said, those guys are awful big over there. So a few days later, Sparky Adams came from Baldwin Wallace, and he took me to Baldwin Wallace, and they had their spring relay, the big spring track meet. So I went there, and he introduced me to a lot of the players. And my mom was having some health issues at that time, and my dad was not good when there was a dilemma. He wasn't any good. So I didn't want to be that far from home.
Mm-hmm.
So I went, BW offered me a full ride, which I took. And all I had to do was keep my grades up and play football for 4 years, which was good to me. All right. So that's when I went to Baldwin Wallace.
And then when you graduated from Baldwin Wallace, obviously you graduated, your plan was to go into education, I'm assuming. Did you apply at other schools?
No.
Or did you want to,
No,
were you directly coming back home?
Our senior year in college, Bonnie and I got married. December 21st, 1957, the longest night of the year. We got married in North Olmsted. Bonnie was from North Olmsted. She grew up and was raised in the same house that Greg lives in right now. So we got
Greg
married.
is your son that's sitting
My
over here.
youngest son, yeah. Greg lives in Grandma's house. They bought that house in 1945, right after World War II. My father-in-law, Jimmy, was a pilot his whole life. He was from Wellington. My oldest son, Jeff, lives out on the farm that he was raised on.
In Wellington?
Yeah,
Oh.
yeah. So we've sort of kept things
Mm-hmm.
pretty nice. All right. And everybody still talks to each other.
But how was it I mean, did Brunswick contact you about coming
No,
back, or how
Cecil
did
Towsley.
that happen?
I was going to tell you, Bonnie and I got married. We got a room at the Baker Funeral Home in Berea, right on Front Street.
You got a room at the funeral home?
Yeah. Yeah. For $65 a month.
I thought you were talking about your honeymoon night. I'm sorry.
No.
Okay.
No. We really didn't have a honeymoon. No.
So the funeral home
We were-
the funeral home had space to lease out.
There's a house right next to the funeral
Oh, okay,
home.
okay,
We had an apartment. There were 2 apartments down and 2 up.
okay,
We had an apartment upstairs.
okay,
That's where we lived when we graduated from BW.
okay.
All right. That's where we lived when Jeff was born, at the Baker Funeral Home.
And you were saying something about Cecil Towsley.
Cecil Towsley came to see me. He was a superintendent. And he asked me if I would come back to Brunswick as the head football coach. He said they hadn't won a game in 4 years. So I came back to Brunswick.
Now was Bill Jacob?
Bill Jacobs left and went to Cuyahoga Heights.
So he had already gone.
He left the same year
I guess so. What I'm asking is, it's not that they were. It's not like you were pushing Bill Jacobs out. He had already gone.
No. When I graduated from high school, Bill went to Cuyahoga Heights.
Okay.
And he spent the rest of his career at Cuyahoga Heights.
Okay.
They hired a new guy called, I think his name was Schmobach or something like that. He replaced Bill Jacobs. He and the basketball coach, I think, was a guy named Raleigh Plotz.
Oh, I remember that name.
Yeah.
He went on to Medina, I think. He did some
I
stuff
think
in
so.
Medina, yeah.
But Kurt Schmobach was the football coach that I replaced.
Okay.
And like I said, they hadn't won a game in 4 years. I think my first year of coaching, our first game was with St. John, Kansas.
Actually, I know it was because here's a copy of an article that was in the Gazette in September of 1958. It says, Brunswick football fans will have their first look at Don Shackleton's 1958 grid squad Friday night when Cleveland St. John, Kansas plays a visit to the local field. The new coach, spurring the popular T formation, has installed a single wing offense in an effort to improve on the touchdown output this season. So you were right on. It was St. John, Kansas.
They're still there, some of
You
them.
see, yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I want to ask, before you talk a little bit more about that, I want to ask you how it was, because I went through a similar experience. I mean, having been a student at Brunswick High School and then coming back as a teacher and a coach. When you came back, was it odd? Did you feel odd? Did the people that you had as teachers, were they like tiptoeing around you? I mean,
No.
how did that go?
No, I loved them. I
And-
love it. I still do.
and-
I think very highly of them. I loved Lee Mara was one of my teachers.
Yeah.
I loved her. Maud Edwards, I truly love. Lou Vizentainer. And trying to think who else.
Well, I know there were still some people there when I there was like
They were,
Mrs. Goodwin was an English
Oh.
teacher.
she was a great one.
Yeah, she was.
Yeah.
Actually, she was the reason I became an English teacher myself. Yeah,
Yeah.
she was great. There was Hank Gimble, of course, the government teacher. Was he there when you were there?
He was not one of my teachers, no.
No. Okay.
No. No, he came after I did, I think.
So when you came back as a colleague of these people, for me it was hard when I came back to Brunswick. It was hard for me to not call the people I had as teachers. I always still called them Mr. or Mrs. Was that the same with you?
I would call Miss Edwards, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And Miss Mara, I wouldn't call her Lee.
Yeah.
Lou Vizentainer, I would call Lou,
Did you?
yeah.
So did you enjoy your first year back? I mean, was it a good year?
It was tough.
It was hell?
It was tough. We had, I remember we came back and I brought a guy that also graduated in BW, Bill Toole. He was one of my assistants. And we went up in that, if you remember, there was a projection room up in the old gymnasium. That's where they kept all the football equipment. There was only football equipment for about 12 guys in there. between pants and shoulder pads and helmets. And I wondered, what has happened? When I left here, we had 30 or 40 guys out for football. We had 19 guys come out that year. All right. And my first year, we only had 19 guys come out for football. I wondered what had happened to this football program. And basketball, of course, wasn't any better team-wise. Athletics had just gone like that. And then halfway during, probably 2/3 way through the season, our last game was with, not our last game, but one of our last games was with Strongsville. Strongsville was really tough. But on a Monday after school, we had a meeting in the same room where I went to the 4th grade, and we had a meeting up there right near the gym. And these seniors had never won a game. And I asked them, I said, are you guys tired of football? I said, I can't imagine all 4 years of high school, you never won a game. 8 of them said, yeah, they hadn't had enough, including the quarterback. And I said, if you've really had enough, just go down and clean out your locker. There won't be any shame or any harm. And just say, I've had enough of football. I don't want any more. So they did that. Now it's Monday, and Friday night we're playing Strongsville. I had to find a quarterback. So I had passing games in gym class. And there was this left-handed kid called Ray Gillespie. That Friday night, he started as a freshman, started against Strongsville.
Wow.
And he played the rest of the way, all through high school.
I remember that name. I was a young boy.
We were with Ray the other day. Ray now lives in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh.
He and his wife were in, and Rich had us all over to his house a few weeks ago. Then we had another blessing walked in one day with a football on one arm and a gym bag in the other. It was Eddie Taylor. Eddie Taylor got kicked out of Cleveland. He and a few other kids had done some things they shouldn't have done in Cleveland. Fortunate enough, there was a guy named Lenny Peterson who went to Baldwin Wallace, who now lived in Brunswick. And he became Eddie Taylor's parole officer.
Oh.
That's why Eddie moved to Brunswick, because he had a sister that lived in Brunswick. Eddie was the greatest athlete we had at that time. He and Ray Gillespie got along very well. The last game we played that year was against Buckeye. I think we beat Buckeye 7-0. It was a tie game until like the last minute of the 4th quarter. Ray Gillespie threw a pass to Eddie Taylor that went all the way. It's the first game they had won in 4 years.
And you went on for what, 8? How many years were you the head coach? How many years were you there?
7.
7. And
in 1965, I was called before the school board, and they had just named Dick Veering as the superintendent. And they asked me to step down as the head football coach.
Oh, they did?
Yes.
Did you have any idea that that was coming?
No. But they wanted a new football coach. Now, by that time, we had a lot of guys on the varsity team. We had a freshman team and an 8th grade team. But they weren't happy. One guy in particular on the school board wasn't happy. So 3 guys on the school board asked me to become the junior high principal. Jack Lazat was the junior high school principal at that time. Prior to him, it was Bill Jedlicka. I said, I don't have my certificate to be a junior high principal. He said, we'll overlook that. You become the junior high principal. I said, no. My mom told me, now I still wasn't bringing home $100 a week. I was working for Arvid Nord at a hardware store for $1 an hour every weekend. Saturday and Sunday I was working at the hardware store. And I still didn't bring home $100 a week. My mom said, you should see the paychecks these guys are bringing in from the Ford plant. She was running the Cape Cod Tavern at that time.
Okay.
So in May of 1965, I got in the car. Bonnie was raised in North Olmsted, always wanted to live in Bay Village. I drove to the Lorraine plant. And 2 hours later, I was a foreman. I started at the Lorraine Ford Assembly plant.
I always wondered where you went when you left.
I went there to make money. I was there 1 year. I made enough money to get ourselves out of hock, be able to buy the new house. I worked 12 hours a day. One time I was in the plant at 5 o'clock Thursday morning. I didn't leave the plant till 10:30 Sunday night. I made more money in that whole weekend than I would have made in months still coaching and teaching.
Yeah.
And one day they came over and they said, Don, starting tomorrow, you'll work nights. I said, I won't work nights anymore. So I quit the Ford Motor Company at Lorraine. Then I made one of the biggest mistakes I think I ever made in my life. A few days after I left there, I got a call, and they asked me to go into sales in their aftermarket sales division, which I don't really know what it means. But they had an office in Independence. And I would have been working for a guy named Marv Ellsworth, who I played with at BW. He was the head of that office. I should have gone with them. I could have stayed with Ford and retired very early.
Yeah. What did you do?
I went into sales. There was a company just moved into Cleveland. I wanted to go into sales. Crown Cork and Seal. They were on West 106th Street. I went into sales with them. One of my accounts was the Glidden Company. And Crown Cork and Seal made aerosol cans, beer and beverage cans, paint cans. They made the original aerosol cans. And one night I was up in Frankenmuth, Michigan, and I sold bottle caps, all kind of cans and bottle caps. The Stroh Brewery was our big account. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning I had to be at the Stroh Brewery at 7 o'clock because we had all the bottle cap business, and they had 15 filling lines, and they were all our filling lines too. And I went up to Frankenmuth, Michigan to call on the Carling Brewing up there. And the phone rang, and it was a guy from Glidden. And he says, we'd like to talk to you about a job. I said, all right. So I drove down to Detroit the next morning and got on TAG Airlines and flew from Detroit City Airport to Burke. And I spent the whole day with the Glidden Company. And at midnight that night, I joined the Glidden Company. So I went into sales for Glidden.
So I mean, I assume when you started teaching, you probably thought that was going to be your career, and you were going to be a coach and a teacher.
Yeah.
Were you bitter? Did you have a hard time adjusting?
No, I just realized I had Jeff, and Greg was a baby. And then Bonnie had a nephew named Jim who lived down in Springfield, Ohio. Jim had become an orphan. Jeff was 5, Greg was a baby, and Jim was 12. And I still didn't bring home $100 a week.
Yeah.
Those kids had a habit called eating
Right.
and wearing clothes. Jim was a real eater, still is. But I said, I got to make money. And Bonnie agreed with me. So she stayed in teaching. And then she moved to North Olmsted High School, as I said. And she was there for 36 years. Bonnie passed away in 2000. I don't know. Do you guys remember how long Mom was retired before she passed? Wasn't very long, was it? No, I don't think she was retired very long before she passed. But she taught for 36 years. And she was a teacher's teacher.
Yes, she was.
These guys can remember she would come home from the weekend and grade papers. She said, just leave me alone. I got to grade papers. And when she got done grading papers on some of those reports that she read, she had written more than a kid had written, you know, being critical of what he did this and did this. She was a very good teacher.
So you have, I'm guessing you have fond memories of the time you spent in Brunswick.
Oh, yeah.
Both as a kid growing up and when you were at
Yep.
the high school as a coach, teacher.
Yep.
And I'm guessing you ran across a lot of, like myself, you ran across a lot of really fine people, not just adults but students. And here's another thing that was, these are some names I think that kids that played for you. It says Enns. Was there a Hinkle?
Harry Hinkle.
And was there a Hauser?
Kenny Hauser.
And a Taylor? Do you remember that
What's
name?
the last name?
Taylor?
I don't remember that name.
And how tackles there? There were two guys named Barnett and Chidsey.
Yeah.
Of course, the Chidsey name has been around Brunswick forever too.
Yeah, Wendell Chidsey and Irvin Barnett.
And the guards were Bowman and Nora. I'm curious. Was this? I know very well Len Bowman, but he had a brother. The Bowman that played for you, was that Len or was that his older brother?
No, that was Dick.
Dick. Okay. And Nura, was that Ted Nura?
No, Teddy
had gone off to Vietnam and.
Ted Nura and I was a freshman when Ted Nura was a senior.
Okay.
Ted Nura was an amazing guy.
Yeah, I heard all kinds of stories about him. I mean, his sister Aqua's told me all kinds of course, then, you know, it's pretty noted in Brunswick that he was the first guy from Brunswick that was killed in Vietnam, and he was a pretty good pilot, I understand.
Teddy weighed about 280 pounds when he was in high school, senior in high school. He played football and basketball. He played center in basketball, and nobody could get near the rim. All right. He was the greatest. He was just a great guy. He had a brother, Joe. They both went to Auburn on a full ride.
Okay.
Joe went to Auburn, but he had a concussion problem. But he went all through Auburn with Teddy. Teddy went to Auburn. He came back after his first year. And Bill Jacobs called me up to his office. And Teddy was there. Teddy now weighed about 210 pounds. He was built like a wedge. 1 year at Auburn. And he got in the ROTC, the Air Force ROTC. And he was one of the first. I think when he went down to Vietnam, I don't think it was a war yet.
I think you're right.
I think it was a police action or
I
something.
think you're right.
And they were paying a bounty on pilots. Teddy was one of the first. If you go to the Vietnam Wall of Washington, where I've been a couple times, Teddy's on the very first panel. And I'll tell you something else. 3 or 4 years ago, My wife and I went to the wall, the Vietnam Wall, with another couple. This guy was in Vietnam. When you get to the wall, there are 2 books that are that deep. I opened the first book, right to Pat Mooney's name.
Right.
I saw Teddy's name and Pat Mooney's name, and my buddy Joe was down here, and he was standing there crying.
Yeah, Pat Mooney lived right down the. He was a neighbor. He lived right down the street from us.
He was our paper boy.
Yeah.
Yeah, he lived right in our
Yeah.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he left school a few months early and joined the service. And he was gone within a short time.
Yep. Matter of fact, at his funeral, I came back for his funeral. And his dad offhandedly gave me a very nice comment.
And said what?
He said if you were still coaching, he wouldn't be there.
Oh,
Pat's dad said that to me at the Carlson Funeral Home.
that is a nice compliment.
Yeah.
He was a pretty good athlete too, Pat.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Well, is there? I want to thank you, Don. It's been really interesting for me, and I'm sure anyone that's going to see this is going to give some thought to what things were like in Brunswick and how much things have changed in Brunswick. I wanted to ask you though: is there anything else that you wanted to mention, or that you want to sum up your time in Brunswick? When you think back to Brunswick, what kind of adjectives would you use to describe your time in Brunswick? I mean, sum up how you feel about growing up here and working here and coaching here and teaching here.
No, I think I was blessed to grow up here. I can't think of a nicer place, a better situation to grow up in than Brunswick. What it was, what it is today, to me, is a big jumble. Like I said, I used to walk down 303 and go fishing at Plum Creek, right on the bridge at 303, going into Brunswick Lake. We used to go to Brunswick Lake and go swimming. The Kalfas family owned it.
Right.
I don't know who still owns it.
I don't think Brunswick, the city, I think owns the property now.
But we would go, and Ethel Kalfas decided she was going to make some money. She was going to charge us a dime to go swimming. So my brother gave her a dime.
It was a great place to grow up.
And we go swimming. No, Brunswick was a great. My aunt and uncle lived right up the road, and between my aunt and uncle in the woods was a little house. It's no longer there. I think they might have moved it in on a truck. A single-room house. And Howard Goodman lived there. Howard Goodman had an Essex car with a rumble seat, and he was a piano tuner. And I spent more time with Howard Goodman as a little kid than I did with my mom and dad. And he had this beautiful little guitar. He taught me how to play guitar. But if he had to go somewhere and tune a piano or something, I'd go with him. And if he had to pick up something heavy, I would help him pick it up. Then he'd say, go sit in the corner and don't make a sound. And I'd sit there and I'd wait. And then we go home. We go in his backyard. We dig up some worms. And we go down to Lytle's Creek, down on Sleepy Hollow Road, and we go fishing. Now, it was very important that you don't say a word, and you don't stand up because you'll spook the fish. And I go fishing with my bamboo pole. All right.
Well,
but I spent more time with him than I did with my own mom and dad. He was my babysitter.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that.
He's buried in the old cemetery
Is he?
too. And every Memorial Day, I go get two dozen red roses. This is probably because I'm old and I'm getting a little wacko, you know. But I've done this for many years. I start out in the Wellington Cemetery, where Bonnie is buried, along with her mother. Bonnie and her mother died the same year. Her mom died on April 14th. Bonnie died on October 31st of 2000. They have a family plot out there. They're both buried there. When we finally buried the two of them, they were both cremated. They were buried on December 21st, which is our wedding day.
Oh.
Bonnie's grandma and grandpa are buried right next to them. They all get a red rose. My dad's mother, who lived up on the hill, is buried in LaGrange Cemetery. She gets a red rose. Russell Petchler is buried in Valley City. He gets a red rose. Then I go to the old cemetery. My Uncle Fred, my Aunt Bernice, my Uncle Al, my Auntie Jean, Wayne Robeson, Ralph Strong, they all get a rose. Then I go to the new cemetery over by Pine Hills. My mom and dad and my brother and sister-in-law are buried there. When I got done, I have 23 roses that I gave away.
Well, you started it out by saying maybe it's because you're a little wacko. I'll tell you what, Don, that doesn't sound like somebody that's wacko to me. Sounds like somebody
I really loved going to see Russell Petchler.
Sounds like somebody that's a pretty caring person, not a
Yeah.
wacko.
Yeah, I try to be.
Well,
Yeah.
is there anything you want to add? Is there anything we didn't cover that you want to maybe mention?
Yeah, I want to add how much I enjoy seeing these guys, along with you. We haven't got together in quite a while because some of them aren't here anymore.
Yeah, right.
Denny James.
Did he pass away? Oh, I didn't know that.
Denny lived down, I saw Denny and Pam down in Florida when they were still, my mom and dad lived down in Florida, and Denny came over a couple times. We got together. He and Pam lived not far away from where my dad lived, my mom and dad. I enjoy seeing these guys.
Well, they told me they had a really nice time visiting with you.
Yes, they
Actually,
did.
that's how we ended up here, because John was telling me that you were so full of information about Brunswick back when you were a kid. We thought it'd be a great idea to get you here so you could share it with anybody that can tune in.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Thank you, John. I really enjoy seeing those guys. And I still get together with guys that I played with at college. We lost a lot of them too. But that's all part of getting older, is some of us aren't getting older.
That's true.
But 3 or 4 times a year, the guys that I played with at BW, we get together at the Olive Garden at Bagley Road in 71. We've been doing that for years. The last 2 years, we've lost 6 of them. So I better keep going.
Yeah, you better.
Yeah. But thanks.
Thank
you
you.
very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
really enjoyed it. Now, like I said, I was looking forward to this. You know, first time I met you was almost 60 years ago, and I think I ran into you once, maybe 25 years ago at a basketball game. But I certainly enjoyed hearing what you had to say, and you look pretty good. You look pretty good. You don't look that much different than I remember you looking when you had a coach's hat on.
I got the fancy hat.
You got the fancy hat today. Well, all right. I want to thank Don once again for spending time with us, and thank the Brunswick Area Historical Society for kind of some of the members organizing this, and I hope you all have a great holiday.